Good morning, good afternoon, and good evening. Only a little over a month left till D&I Changemakers 2021. And before we invite experts, explore case studies, go around the world to see what's happening in D&I, we thought a proper discussion or two well in advance of the conference would be a good idea. Hopefully, by the end of this hour, all of you would have come to the same conclusion. Please feel free to join us in the conversation. You can ask questions if you like in your chat windows. I'll do my best to include many of those towards the end of the discussion or at some point in the discussion. Ladies and gentlemen, let's jump right in and welcome Monika, Sandra, Anna, and Susanna. Good morning.
Morning.
Can you all hear me well?
Yes.
The moment has finally arrived.
Yes,
We've all been waiting for this, I guess, talking about it quite a lot in preparation to the conference as well, planning all the details. Now, a discussion like that would normally start with me introducing everyone with a few words, but I suppose our audience is well informed. They know just about everything about you already as far as D&I and your activities are concerned. So let me start with a somewhat different question. Why, of all the things you could be doing in life professionally, D&I? Who would like to start? It's a surprise question, isn't it? I
know. Okay, so maybe I could start because it's, if I could say why, it's not that why I found this job or why I went into D&I, because it just simply happened. It just simply happened during my professional career. I was working for many years in human resources, in trainings, developing social skills of managers. And to be honest, diversity and inclusion is that thing that really gives me the purpose of what I'm doing and give me that kind of satisfaction that I have my own contribution in even a little change, but I feel I can really make a difference.
Started Diversity Hub.
Well, I might continue because I think I'm on the similar page as Anna. I wasn't actively looking for a role in the DEI field, and sorry, just to land on my plate almost 2 years ago. My personal mission is to help people unleash their creative confidence. And I spent many years in an innovation field before in change management, and this is my core when it comes to how I'm addressing D&I from the employer perspective. As we all know, to have and drive innovation in the organization, diversity is one of the critical key factors, and I'm having a chance now to address that topic from that side.
For how long, Sandra, if you could just add now?
Well, officially in the role, I'm since July 2020. In the topic of the innovation change management, I would say it's around 8 years.
Mm-hmm. Thank you. Monika, can we go to you now?
Sure. Inclusion of diversity is somehow my way of living, so it's my passion. I can't imagine actually not considering diversity in my life. I'm a woman with disability. I'm a mom. I'm a partner. My husband is a foreigner. He is coming from Bulgaria. So there are lots of aspects very closely in my life surrounding me that really make my life very diverse. I work with different individuals at State Street on a global scale. So my co-workers, colleagues at work are really diverse, and I really embrace it, like on a daily basis. I love being inspired by others, and I love inspiring others. So these two ways work for me perfectly under diversity.
I couldn't be more happy that I started with the why question. Over to you, Susanna.
Sure, and I think I can relate to what Monika said just now, because I feel that I didn't really have a choice not to pursue diversity and inclusion, because I've been born into a multicultural, multi-religious family, and throughout my childhood and then adolescence, I've been in this minority group all my life. And in the same time, I had this curiosity and keen interest in how the things are working in the way that we cannot all be included, having the same rights and opportunities. So to be honest, at school, in the university, in my early career, all the time I've been doing D&I. Even 8 years ago, when I started working with international students, there wasn't something like diversity and inclusion on the market yet. So I had really to push forward the topic, to explain. And after 8 years, I still feel I need to explain to some of the people. So the progress has been made, but at the same time, there is still a lot that has to be done. And in regard to my position, because I'm equality, diversity, and inclusion leader, so this is a daily job of mine, I feel a deep gratitude and luck, that I'm doing the job that is fully mirroring my personality, but at the same time helps me to contribute.
Thank you so much. Let me come back to Anna for a while. Anna, when did you start Diversity Hub as a project?
Yeah, I think this is a question you asked me before, but I haven't heard it. So it was in 2016. We founded Diversity Hub when we discovered that this is the field that is very important for the companies. It wasn't anything new, I know, but here in Poland, it was a very new thing. And we realized that time that we could be very helpful to support companies, bringing the knowledge, building a kind of a platform to discuss, to learn from each other, to bring know-how from Western countries to Poland, and that's how we started. So now we cooperate with more than 100 global companies, and we are going outside of Poland, not only serving companies here. So it's another thing that makes me very happy and very satisfied, that not only we can make a change, but we are always growing, we are still growing, and we can develop our organization and also have a wider range for our actions.
Cooperating with 100 companies, that makes it like 3 days per company. Ladies and gentlemen, let's...
But I'm not alone there.
I'm sure you are.
Diversity Hub,
Jokes aside, D&I ignorance. What are we really talking about here? What kind of ignorance? What is ignorance? When? How? Why? Who would like to answer that first? Can we start with Sandra, perhaps?
Another question, making sure that we're all on the same page before we jump into a deeper conversation. And my friends knew that I'm taking part in that panel discussion, and we had a very vivid conversations over the last days. And we're asking ourselves if ignorance is the right word, right? So Merriam-Webster dictionary defines ignorance as lack of knowledge, education, or awareness, which at the end of the day is just stating the fact. And as a rule, it's nothing bad, right? Because we can always learn, we can always become aware, and we can gain education at the end of the day. What is probably more interesting in the context of this conversation is the mindset behind, right? And here, sorry, what comes to my mind is this division of fixed and growth mindset, in a bit twist, of course, because she's talking about the talents and belief that we can grow and learn. And here I think I would focus on a manifestation of a certain level of ignorance. If we don't have knowledge, we are not aware, we willing to gain that knowledge? Are we willing to educate ourselves? And if the answer and consciously are rejecting the idea of building that for ourselves, this is where that becomes a problem. So that's my thinking behind that.
Thank you. Can we go to Monika now? With your experience, Monika, I suppose the consequences of ignorance may differ as we just defined it right now. Could you comment on that? What's your experience?
Absolutely. If, for example, the decision-making bodies like top management, board of directors, or even CEO claim that inclusion is important, and then no support is provided to managers or even HR as supporting function, such organization will underestimate the effort that is needed to ensure the inclusion of diversity. They are ignorant, thinking that employees, for example, will do it on their own without any additional support. This is not surprising when you consider that most diversity and inclusion initiatives are developed to comply with corporate governance and self-regulation, very often under the heading of CSR. For example, in most workplaces, these initiatives are usually poorly funded tactical inclusion initiatives, disconnected from broader, more substantial and funded general training programs. They may be well-meaning, but they are misguided in their approaches since the beginning.
So essentially what you're saying, one thing is that it often falls into compliance. So the kind of mindset, the kind of thinking which concludes with, let's get it done and let it be over with, so to say, right? So it's very difficult to make it part of the company culture, but rather it's something that needs to get done because it needs to look well on paper.
Yeah, absolutely.
Or in the reporting procedures. Is that right? I will now ask our studio just to keep the image as it is now, because it would be fantastic to see all of your reactions. And I really do want it to be a discussion. So at any point, any one of you wants to add something, comment, cut in, please feel free to do so. Susanna, does it really matter? We're talking about ignorance, trying to define it here using the dictionary definition of it. How does it matter?
I think this is an essential question. And I would also make it a little bit less dramatic in a sense, because of course it matters. All of us, we want to be surrounded by engaged, motivated, supportive colleagues, but the nature of workplace is a bit different. And what I want to say that it's okay that it's different, because we are, as the living organism, because workplace itself is a living organism, it has its dynamics. So every time we are talking about ignorant, let's call like that group, there is also the group which is very active in supporting that. There is also this indecisive middle. So we usually have those three groups. And what I want to emphasize that we are not supposed to have all the coworkers, all managers, all people around us who would support any initiative. So this is absolutely fine that we don't agree, that we even disagree sometimes, or we don't have the common base for exchange. This is something to work with, right? But I would personally prefer to confront the person who is ignorant rather than to work with the person who is fakely optimistic about diversity and inclusion and in practice does nothing, right? So I would just conclude that it's nothing to be afraid of. There is no need, for this antagonism, let's call it like that, in a sense that there are those ignorant managers and here we are, diversity and inclusion experts, us against them, and so on and so on. Workplace is a living organism, and having some skeptics and ignorance in it is also absolutely fine. The question is how we work with it.
Mm-hmm. Is it, now what you've just said, I'm thinking about the actual broader impact. Is it also a question of trust? Because Monika mentioned that depending on where this ignorance happens, the consequences may differ. So the question is it very much about trust as well? Because if you hear declarations at the top level of the company about the importance of something, and then you see nothing happen, someone basically loses credibility doing that instantly. So is it also a question of trust when we talk about the broad impact of ignorance?
Well, if I may say, I wouldn't talk about trust. I would more call it a will, because just to summarize, I'm speaking as the last person in this question, but just to summarize what was said before, I see three different maybe types of understanding ignorance and also three behaviors, and that are connected with the will of learning and will of being engaged and get deeper into diversity and inclusion. So the first mentioned by all of my colleagues is lack of knowledge. So that means, okay, I don't know, and I don't understand. It's quite good thing because we have room for development. It gives a kind of chance to success. Another thing is not having a will to learn. So we can hear, okay, I don't want to understand, okay, because maybe it's not about me, I don't need it. And the third, in my opinion, the worst, or maybe the worst, is the fourth one, what Susanna mentioned. But the third is, I would call it conscious regard. So that means that the person, and also we can see it on organizational level, it's I simply don't care. I don't care. It doesn't matter at all to me. And on that level, we can have this kind of attitude with using diversity and inclusion as a way of building image, as a way of building brand, without very fair and authentic process inside of the organization.
So would you all agree that, based on what you've just said, in answer to the first question, there are like two R's that matter a lot? One is relevance. How is it relevant to me, to my experience, to my background? And the other one is relatability. It's somehow, for people to consider D&I policies important, they genuinely need to understand that it has a direct impact on them.
Yeah, that's one of the basic truth of diversity and inclusion, that you need to find a personal link and you need to address personal needs to find personal understanding. And this is a key to success, in my opinion. Of course, among many others, but one of...
Anyone else would like to comment? Because I already have a comment or a question from Anna in the chat window. Anna says, my last company is a great example. I got fired based on neurodivergent traits. I am openly neurodivergent. They just had a webinar about inclusive design. Does it count as ignorance or dots? What do you think? How would you comment on that? Complete silence.
I'm just thinking, that it's more of an arrogance than ignorance in a sense, and this is a nightmare of every diversity and inclusion specialist or manager in the organization, when the lived experience of your co-workers differ from what you're doing in the top of the organization. So when there is such an example, of course, we can, say that the organization is bad or something like that. But the problem is that there is an inconsistency, right? There is inconsistency between the good intention, because if the company does such workshops and initiatives, there is an intention, but somehow the link is broken with the practice. And when we're talking about this cost of ignorance, I think this broken expectation is the one of the biggest costs of diversity and inclusion, because you're joining organization seeing it does such initiative, and then your experience within the organization is very different. So I would say this is the example, but also there is a link between this ignorance and arrogance in a sense.
May I add to that?
Please do.
Because I think, without knowing the entire context, I think what resonated for me from that story is the organizational intentions, which Susanna mentioned, and maturity of the organization. Right? Here, I think we are getting into the topic of where the organizations are choosing D&I as a performative tool to boost the employer branding, not necessarily walking the talk or being authentic with what they're doing, right? So, and that's a perfect moment of validating the organization willingness to embrace D&I, right? Talking is easy, making the change happen and follow the talk with actual behaviors, it's way more difficult. And those are the moments of truth for validating how serious the organizations are about D&I. And that example, it's probably one among, I don't want to put a number behind, but let's say many on the market.
Sandra, I'm glad you said that. Yes, Anna?
I would also comment to Susanna with one thing that, in my opinion, intention is a good start, because a company, when they have intentions, they probably, if they are authentic, they are on the good way to start D&I or develop D&I.
We all know the proverb. We all know the proverb, Anna, the road to hell is paved with good intentions.
Yes, yeah, I know. But what I want to say is, in my opinion, in my experience, the worst thing is the difference between declarations and how we present our organization and what is really happening inside. Because there are a lot of misunderstanding, and it may cause a lot of confusion. I have some examples in my experience of seminars or meetings in companies that were organized by decision makers, even with inviting people from outside, and it was. And then finally, they didn't appear on the meetings, So I saw many people invited, many guests, really confused and feeling hurt with that.
Anna,
so
a quick one.
Versus impact, right?
Exactly. I'm going to explore costs in a moment, because it's essentially what we really want to talk about here today. But Anna, of those 140 companies you work with on a daily basis, when you first came to those companies physically to a meeting, or during the pandemic, maybe in a remote hybrid formula, how did you feel about the level of awareness, what D&I really is in the first place? Could people answer the basic question, what is D&I? What do you think? How does it apply to you? Is it easy for top corporate representatives to answer this question, or are you already taking it for granted that they know it, or do you still find yourself surprised?
No, we never take it for granted, and this is our experience. But it depends. We have a lot of customers that from the very beginning, they really know what's going on. They understand diversity and inclusion. They are really deeply open and build.
What's the percentage?
I would say 60% of them.
60
another
or 16?
Part, 60%.
Okay,
I would say
that's better than I thought.
Among our customers. Another group are the companies that are really starting or are on the very premature stage of their journey. So to answer, to tell the long story short and answer your question quite briefly, is that we usually start with assessing the level of maturity of the company, because we need to know how, on what stage are they, how open are on organizational level, but also taking into account personal level. I mean managers, but also the rest of staff. So, you know, you need to be aware of what are the grounds in the company to implement diversity and inclusion. Because as we said at the beginning, if you need to find a personal link between, you need to find the understanding and the acceptance. But the fully understanding for me is a crucial thing. So, you know, the question is complex because it depends on many different factors, on the sector and so on.
We've got another important comment in the chat window coming from Isabella. I believe there's some danger in focusing on diversity being personally relevant. It sounds almost like the argument of this could be your mother, sister, girlfriend when discussing sexual harassment affecting women. Diversity should be important even if you're not a minority. Can you comment on that? A quick one, please.
I can just chip into that, because I think that's a very valid point that Isabella made, and she recognized the risk, and I can just plus one to her words. On the other hand, from the change management perspective and how we are driving the change in the organization, this personal element really is helpful to drive that. You have to convince someone. Having this personal anchor in the conversation, and my friend calls it a golden bridge, really helps to make the first steps. But at the end of the day, it's not always possible to find those bridges when you are talking to extremely privileged people who are not in this mindset of change and the growth mindset for the topic. So again, no silver bullet to the problem, but definitely having in mind the both sides is extremely important, at least for me.
And I'm sure also the fact that we're not talking about immediate relevance or relatability. Just look at it like that. If you have a company's basic legal compliance, it doesn't necessarily mean that it will affect you today, but it may affect you 2-3 years from now, and you would like to be sure it's there, even if it's similarly, company culture can be defined like that. It doesn't impact you on a given day directly, maybe, but at one point it will, and you very much want it to be part of your company culture. Let's talk about costs. What are we talking about here? Because cost is obviously a broad concept. Are we talking about money, burnouts, motivation, costs of onboarding, employing new employees? What is it? Can we start with you,
It's
Monika?
about everything. Yeah. So reading your mind.
It's about everything. Come on.
It is. I will show you one example. For example, initiatives such as employee resource groups, so-called ERGs, are very often viewed as cost centers, so expenses.
Yet another fashionable acronym for many, isn't it?
Exactly. And, you know, nobody sees them as profit centers because they are actually investments, right? To drive influence in the workplace and growth in the marketplace. We need to be aware that leaders involved in, for example, employee resource groups are really getting competence, developing their passion, but also, competencies and skills, etc. So this is an investment, and companies do not realize that. Staff as well, as we are talking about, motivation of people and cost of motivation, absolutely. Because, for example, creating opportunity for the company to build employee network gives the opportunity to many of a feeling of belonging, right? And we know that when employees have got that feeling of belonging, it prevents really high attrition. Organizations do not allow building communities internally. Some of them, of course, I'm talking about those that are ignorant, and really there is a need in the society, also in the society within organizations, to create these safe spaces for those that are most diverse, but also for those that share common passions, interests, etc. Right? So, in my opinion, diversity is very much about holistic approach. So, as we mentioned before, and Isabella raised that, there is some risk around it. On the other hand, each of us wants to be unique and wants to be treated with respect that we all deserve, right? So really the companies need to focus on that.
Yes, no doubt. But Monika, the question is also, how do we define costs here? Are we seeing cost as the cost to the company in terms of investment, in terms of, managers are trained and used to thinking that the best kind of investment works along the lines of a simple equation, like I put in this much and I want to see this much in outcome, preferably fast. So how does it relate to the concept of cost in D&I? Because obviously, if you go back to some iconic books and biographies like Isaacson's biography of Steve Jobs, he for years had openly referred to so-called Class A employees, typical meritocracy. We're employing the best. Whereas only yesterday, if you watch a product presentation of the company, there would be a lot of diversity in the way they present products. I mean, one product would be presented by 10 different people representing 4 different cultures. So there is a lot more awareness along the lines of diversity. So how are we talking about cost here?
Again, cost, if you are referring to products, there is a cost about the branding of the company. There are some pioneers placing their products, and we know that these companies are much more celebrating and embracing diversity than others. There are really nice touching commercials on TV that you can see that the company is really aware that the organization has got a strategy and is very, consequent in executing of that diversity and inclusion strategy. The more the product is adjusted to individual needs, some banks are offering financial tools, for example, for the LGBT plus clients, sometimes in very conservative countries like Switzerland, and they are fully aware, understanding what the clients' needs are, to adjust the product the way it should be done, because it will differ. The needs of the client will differ. The same for about the employees that I mentioned, the feeling or the need of belonging and motivation. If the organization is not supporting inclusion, many people will be leaving that organization, will be leaving the line managers that are not empathic, are not inclusive, they are not engaging in candid conversations with the teams.
Would you say, Monika, it's already the reality?
Yes.
Is it reality
absolutely.
already, or is it still wishful thinking, or is it like getting there slowly?
For some, it's a reality, because the organizations and people in the organizations are maturing, as Anna said. There are companies that are already there, and they are just, learning even more and getting better. But for some and many organizations, they are missing even, the basics, right? Basic understanding.
I'm sure you will all agree, I don't even expect a comment on that one, frankly, that the pandemic, the last 2 years, has actually helped people become more introspective and understanding towards these issues. Feel free to nod. No, it's a joke.
Yes,
but,
you're right.
There are several more dimensions. There is a psychological dimension. There is the, competitive advantage. There is the cost in terms of money perspective. Can we talk about the psychology of it? Anna, can you add something? Because you have this umbrella perspective.
Yeah, but first I would follow Monika, because Monika mentioned belonging. And I know you, Łukasz, and I know you like numbers. So I can deliver some numbers and some studies here. There's a study from Better Up for EY that was published in 2019. And according to that study, workplace belonging can lead up to 56% increase of job performance. This is one thing. The second thing, that it leads to 50% reduction of turnover risks, and the most important for many, 75% decrease in employee sick days. So we can easily translate it into costs, because these are advantages, but we can translate it to costs and ask ourselves, can we really afford this, right? But we also have a lot, if you ask me, about psychological costs. It is also connected to belonging, to being included, to being a part of the team, and also not feeling who I am in the workplace. And these are very bad consequences on the individual. And for example, American Psychological Foundation, they did research and they asked people who didn't come out in the workplace. So those people reported fear and anger more often. They presented symptoms of depression more often. Or they also complained of chronic fatigue and lack of motivation. And they usually feel minority stress. So as we know, minority stress is very harmful for our mental health and may lead to many mental disorders. And just I think interesting information may be also another data from different study that more than 6% of people who didn't come out in the company and they need to hide their sexual orientation think about suicide during their work. It is really
terrifying.
Yeah, and very important to understand, very important to take into consideration when we think about psychological cost, about the real mental condition of our staff.
We are going to explore those studies during the conference, I'm sure, because over the last few months in particular, there have been very interesting studies from all around the world. So at the beginning of December, we'll talk about those, I'm sure. And I will be pushing you for numbers, of course, Anna. Let's talk about, I'm looking at Sandra smiling, let's talk about money and recruitment, the consequences, the costs in the most physical, tangible sense for the companies.
Yeah, two angles you're tackling. So recruitment that Monika partially addressed with the topic of ERG, and the first thought that immediately came to my mind that for many talents on the market, having a safe space in the organization that ERG is providing, employee resource group are providing, are one of the decision-making factors when choosing the future employer. And I know it at least from my organization, we have very active LGBTQ+ network, Queer Seite, and we've learned from our candidates that for many, that was one of the key factors when choosing the employer. So we can see ERGs also not as a profit, not direct, but still helping us attracting the talents to join the company. But we also know that for many people, and I don't want to intentionally use the generations, as I was inspired by Susanna's post yesterday on LinkedIn, who challenged us to rethink whether we should use the generation to describe our employees. So intentionally not referring to generations, but to the talent pool on the market. D&I becomes more and more relevant as a topic for them. And if we are not addressing that, we are losing the opportunity to gain new talents, right? That's the one side of the story. On the other hand, money. If we are addressing a diverse pool of customers and our workforce, it's not diverse, the likelihood that we will meet those needs or we will leave unmet needs on the table, meaning losing money, it's quite high. So basically this imperative of making sure that your workforce, the customers you're trying to serve, really it's a starting point for making sure that we're using all of the business opportunities we have on the market. So those two thoughts on money and recruitment from my side.
Thank you, Sandra. Susanna, can we come back to you for a while? Because we're talking about the way employees think about their cost consequences. But can we look to the future a little, especially through the filter of competitive advantage, perhaps? Do you have any comments in your experience on that?
I think this is essential aspect to consider. And to talk about the competitive advantage of the future, we should also realize who is ignorant, right? Because it differs. If we are talking about the managers, I think there are two levels, right? There are managers that might be ignorant, or there is an organization that might be ignorant. If we are talking about the manager, for me, he or she or them are losing the competitive advantage in the sense of the potential, right? Because let's imagine the organization is very active in diversity and inclusion. It invests a lot into the communication, infrastructure improvements, into the marketing, products, and so on. And there are the managers who are staying ignorant, right? So the organization is attracting the best talent on the market. This is what we all are aiming at, right? And then the manager is not able to use this potential of the best talent, right? So this is the lost competitive advantage of his team, of the organization, of the talent he or she is gaining from the market. If we're talking about the organization that is ignorant, this will be a different case because the world has changed and is rapidly changing. And if you ask any organization about the vision for the future, right? All of them want to be such forward-thinking, having this mission of serving all people and providing the best innovative, creative, and so on solutions. But very little number of them really understanding that they would not be able to achieve their mission without diversity and inclusion. This is just not possible because every mission of the company is related to its people, to customers, and to the society. And if we, as the people, customer, and society are very diverse, because every one of us is, then how you're supposed to fit that expectation without using diversity and inclusion approach? So this is, about strategic thinking. Most of organizations are still prefer to stay with this short-term understanding of their mission, of their vision. And my argument here would be that you have to look into this potential of becoming the major player, and you will never achieve such position without diversity and inclusion.
Which kind of sort of invites a comment, Susanna, because it all sounds like wishful thinking to some extent to me, in the sense that I wish we were in such a positive environment, just like you're saying. But are we talking about pressure from outside, or are we talking about companies coming to this awareness from the inside genuinely? Because there could be those two perspectives, right? How do you think? Are we really at that stage where the pandemic, the last 2 years, have changed the mindsets of top management so much that they are genuinely interested to go beyond what used to be CSR and a simple mindset, we should do something for stakeholders and communities, and go beyond into reshaping our culture from the ground up, so to say? Is it really happening, like on a, say, 25% plus scale or more?
If I can answer that, because for me, it's not like, is it coming from inside or outside? It's both. It's coming from inside and from outside.
Great.
Because because we as society are changing and hopefully evolving. And I wouldn't say it's because of pandemic only, because I started doing D&I at
Hopefully
IKEA
not.
in 2000. in 2019, and the expectation was already there. And if this is something that comes from the manager, it comes from the people. And even when I am looking at the examples on the market, there are few examples recently when the brand was somehow tackling diversity and inclusion not in an appropriate way, and there was such a reaction from the audience. I can give you the example of H&M recently and about their ad that men don't ask for help or something like that. I can like assure you that 5 years ago nobody would pay attention to that, nobody, and now the internet just blew. And there are so many examples of that because the level of conscience is different, the expectation on the market is different, and internally as well. But we also should be humble about that because we all in some way living in this corporate bubble, meaning the business and the society is not only about the corporations, right? So we might lead the way, but it's not only about the way we see things.
I really couldn't be
On
more
the other
happy to see
hand,
all of you. So optimistic.
on the other hand, when you have internal initiatives, they are also visible externally, using, you know, social media, using the employees sharing the information simply, right? For example, at State Street, our employees come from many backgrounds and have really a wide variety of life experiences. And last year, we started to work to implement really concrete actions to address racism and inequality at State Street. And we developed a program which is called 10 Actions Against Racism. It's a global initiative run by over 200 volunteers from whole globe that we and all the locations where we operate. And we have a clear goal. We must work to help to end systemic racism in our communities. So, as you can imagine, we are not talking only about the organization itself, but also externally. And through the actions taken internally, we change the environment, we change really the people perception, people understanding, and we have also a great impact externally. We had really great conversations with our colleagues working for State Street who were sharing their personal experiences, how race and ethnic origin was limiting them at some point of their careers, right? And through that 10-point action plan, we are really, you know, pledging to use our power, our voice, and our capital to build a better and more just world, not only in the company, but also externally in the society. So I think that in the current modern world, no matter how you want to focus internally only, you will not do it. Whatever you do internally will be echoed and visible externally. So, you know, the time when the companies were, for example, giving away lots of money for charities and just making good, but not sharing that, these times have ended, right? Currently, there is nothing wrong in doing or, you know, executing great inclusion strategies and not sharing that practices, not showing them externally. There's nothing wrong in it, right? It's a modern, how we interpret modern CSR, we do the same for modern I&D, right?
Monika, I'm sure all of us agree on that one. And yet, coming back to what Susanna said, I think we need to be a little careful there because, well, expectations were also there when it comes to climate change back in the 70s, and you know where we stand currently and how far we've gone with climate change and the consequences. We've got 10 minutes left. So I hope you forgive me. I'll be cutting in a little bit more now and speeding up with the discussion because I've got loads of questions for you and 2 comments from the chat window. Joanna, how to convince majority groups representatives, that is not involved in NERGs, that D&I matters for them as well? And the second one from Nancy, in my opinion, we must start with classes of inclusion, diversity and interculturality from the basic school level. In this way, we will avoid current issues and problems in companies. Any comments?
I can comment on the first question, but first I really need to go back to the previous one, because the conclusion I have is there's no one size fits all. So I agree with Susanna that today we are talking about corporations, and we still are in a corporate bubble. But the market, the business is completely diverse. So 90% of the market, at least in Poland, is composed by small and medium enterprises. There's no diversity and inclusion activities there because, the owners, managers are not interested. They have no money. They are not aware of that. They don't see the business advantage on investing in diversity and inclusion. Another thing is, and this is my perspective, because we work with different types of companies operating on different markets. D&I looks differently in B2B corporates and differently in B2C corporations. Another thing, one conclusion for the end to maybe close the topic of how it can differ is you can imagine also that there are companies that are state-owned or very dependent on political decision. And in countries like Poland or Hungary, there will be really, really small space for discussion about diversity and inclusion. And that is their business strategy. And that is, their aware decision. And we should also understand it and take it into consideration. But going back to the question. The question was about ERGs and how to engage decision makers, managers to take part in ERGs actions. So we see that kind of problem very often. And usually when I ask managers, why don't you take part in that? They say, we don't have time. We don't have space for that. There's too many events happening in our company, and we really cannot be there, or we cannot take part in everything. But the question is how to talk about and present. They find a way to understand by managers that their behaviors, their attitudes are really important because they are the people who are observed, who are followed, who are the role models in the organization, and they should give the example. So there's a kind of a test for the real commitment to diversity, how much time you devote for diversity and inclusion, and in the same time, do you take part? Are you with those people who are inviting you? It's not only giving the money for the events, but
Anna,
also
I'm stopping
being
you. I'm stopping you right there.
Okay.
I
hope that I could answer. Mm-hmm.
You did. Do we have an answer or comment to Nancy's statement about education? I'm sure we couldn't agree more. And I stopped Anna commenting on that part in the context of the Polish education system, because then we would probably have a hot debate.
I don't want to talk about Polish education. Sorry, exactly. I'm not ready mentally for that.
International perspective, commenting on where we should start talking about diversity and inclusion.
The sooner the better. So I think that we should really introduce the programs already in the kindergartens, like educating children, on the diversity of people around them, and just teaching them respect. That would be enough, respect and openness. Because my children both are going to international school where they have exposure to different nationalities, different colors of skin, etc. on a daily basis. And for them, it's no surprise. And this reality is becoming, it is natural. So
as you said, Monika, yourself,
the better.
The more exposure, but exposure also makes it relatable and relevant, which brings us back to the question. What Anna said in her previous statement was especially interesting in that she said something between the lines, really. Anna, you effectively you sort of explained that it is especially big companies that have the luxury buffer of having extra time, extra money, extra resources for some extra thinking, that are not preoccupied with daily business priorities. By that I mean not only profit maximization, but basically staying on the surface financially. So in that sense, relevance, there is still a lot more work to be done on relevance. Would you agree?
No. That was not my point, that corporations have enough money to invest in diversity and inclusion, and because it was linked with the time and managers can commit. So it's not the wealth of the company. It's not the case. It's the case is that process, D&I and belonging also, is that process really and truly authentically implemented? It's well understood, it's accepted, and it's, I would say, internalized with managers as their task, because it's not about money. How much time they devote to diversity. It's about their real attitudes. If they really believe that, if they understand, they will find time. Yeah.
We have
Best
3 minutes left, essentially. Yes.
If I may, Łukasz, the last sentence.
Please,
the best I&D trainings are through experiencing, right? So if we don't have exposure, we need to expose ourselves to experience. So sometimes it's enough to go somewhere on purpose and experience and see something that we don't experience on a daily basis. And this can be done by any companies, as Anna mentioned, no matter how big they are, how international, or how much money they have. It's just about commitment. It's about thinking and understanding that it's really important and creating opportunities. This is the most important thing, in my opinion.
Fair enough. We have very little time left, so I'm going to do, and we're in an enviable situation where, well, the participants of our discussion actually have more questions than I do, but we're not going to exhaust all those questions, ask those questions. It's a good sign, because we'll still have much more time during the conference in December, and there are so many areas we want to talk about. But before we end this discussion, I would like to ask you a few more questions, and please decide whoever wishes to answer any of those questions, because we've explored cost already. But my first question here is, how do you recognize a company that actually doesn't ignore D&I? Can anyone answer this question in the simplest possible way?
I can go for that one, perhaps.
Please.
There's no or maybe there could be a matrix for doing that, but again, the answer, it depends. But for my personal purposes, what I'm looking at when trying to define that, first of all, the role of CEO that is playing. Of course, we all have a role to play in driving D&I agenda in the society. Leadership has a special role to play, and the CEO in particular has a stake in it. So I would ask, is the CEO acting also as CDO, Chief Diversity Officer? And we know the examples where that is taking place. Second, is D&I embedded into the business strategy? Business strategy as a set of choices that each organization is making to gain sustainable competitive advantage on the specific industry they're in. So the strategy. And last but not least, is the accountability system for D&I in the organization. So that would be my 3 points. Role of the leadership and the CEO, embedding D&I into the business strategy, not only a D&I strategy on its own, because you can look at D&I strategy that is very employer to employee, employee to employer, but I'm talking here about business strategy and the accountability system.
I have a tough one next. Susanna, can you try and answer this one? Because we've talked about skeptics and organizations not really so keen to see D&I implemented in their organizations. If something is such an obvious benefit for organization, why are there so many skeptics? Is it because of, the usual priority overload, KPIs, etc.? Why do we have so many skeptics? Why are we still talking, defining, exploring the basics in some ways?
Okay, I will answer this one, answering 2 or 3 previous one, because this is the closing remark I want to make
There's a
today.
creative way.
That will be very short, because why do you have so many skeptics in your organization? My question would be, what have you done not to have so many skeptics in your organization? Right? Then what organization is not ignorant? The one that is not ignoring the ignorant coworkers or managers. And then the question unconvinced part of managers. And this is all about one simple thing, that D&I space and D&I topic itself sometimes is very exclusive. We are focusing so much on those who are already into it, meaning they are already supporting. We are not analyzing who is against, what can we do for those people, what are we accessible in a way to those people, because this is, I think, the core of it. And if we are meeting today, and I'm sure our audience consists in majority of people who are supporting D&I in the organization, then ask yourself, how can you engage those who don't support that? Maybe it's about the language, maybe it's about the priorities, maybe it's about the way you communicate the things. The reasons might be different, but you need to shift this focus. And I think this would be the answer to your question. Why so many skeptics? Because we are focusing only on those who are in.
Yeah, that's right. I agree.
Thank you very much. I'm sure we all agree. And last but not least, why is it not about HR only? We're talking about multiple perspectives here. We're talking about all the different aspects to it. Why is it not HR only? Are we talking about the perspective, introducing D&I in a mature form to your company strategy is a sophisticated exercise, really, multidimensional. But at the same time, there's a clear risk that too many cooks can spoil the broth, kill the trust, misplace the actual procedures, and put them in the wrong order. All these things are a delicate equation. So why is it not about HR only? Can someone address that?
Maybe
Because
sometimes it is for some organizations.
For some, yes, but if we are talking about really those that are mature,
recruitment organizations,
it's very much about leadership, right? So leadership must support really all populations, including diverse populations, right? Activating and leveraging their full potential. At the same time, they need to have skills to avoid tensions, right? So because they might disrupt engagement, the overall performance and growth. And what comes to my mind is that Forbes already mentioned a few years ago that growth strategies are becoming less about the business defining the individual and more about the individual defining the business. You can focus on representation, reputation management, and diversity metrics, but without thinking about individuals, you're again thinking about the business defining the individual, not the individual defining the business. So through the innovation mentality, we embrace the transparency, trust, individuality, risk, social responsibility, and that entrepreneurial, mindset, I would say, passion. And we need to embrace the community-minded leaders in the workplace, and much, much more, in my opinion.
And at the end of the day, it's about the sense of belonging and commitment. And in the context of what you had said earlier, the rise in suicidal thoughts and negative belonging and commitment in a very genuine, deep, profound sense couldn't be more important, could it?
No.
I think we've already run out of time 5 minutes ago. So that's a good sign also because it shows there are plenty more topics to be addressed within the D&I framework. We haven't even talked about the strategic perspective, strategic approach. We haven't talked about the cliches and insider-outsider perspectives. But let me close this discussion with a short story. Only a few weeks ago, I was at the conference of the space industry, and I talked to a NASA administrator, a man who had been to space 4 times. He literally opened the door, that was the first one to open the door to the International Space Station years and years ago. And before I even asked him, I didn't even mean to ask him about diversity and inclusion, but throughout his to my different technical questions, the word diversity came on and on, again and again in his statement. And it was kind of ironic to me because the man who looked at the Earth from the outside, it was actually obvious for him that diversity matters. Diversity is hugely important. If you don't have a diverse team, you think inside the box. You can never come up with fresh ideas. And in the conversation, I mentioned a fresh idea. You probably remember the famous rover Pathfinder in 1997. There was a dilemma how to land a rover on a planet as distant as Mars. And they came up, they literally put it in a cushion and threw it on the planet as if it was a ball. And that actually required a fresh, creative perspective. Here's a story to close our discussion today and leave a lot of room for the future. We have another discussion before the conference and then the conference at the beginning of December. You're all invited to join us. Thank you very much. Thank you, Sandra. Thank you, Monika, Anna, Susanna. It's been wonderful to talk to you over distance. And see you in December. Thank you all.
Thank you.
Thank you.